Dr Frans Cronje, political analyst, perhaps political scientist of the Social Research Foundation, giving us some insights into this Moonshot Pact, which has just collapsed, or has it? Frans, good to be talking with you. As we speak, it appears as though the hopes of the opposition in South Africa are now in tatters. The research you guys have been doing, and you've been talking a lot to ANC voters, is, if I recall correctly, and please update us, but that the ANC voters are unlikely to switch to the opposition because they say the opposition bickers too much.
Yeah, that's right. They're about, let's think like this. The DA is standing at around 25% at the moment. Outside of the DA, there's a block of parties that range from Inkatha through Herman Mashaba and ASA, the ACDP, the Freedom Front. They've got about 15. So if you add these two blocks together, we've now got 40%. So that's the broader centrist opposition stands at about 40. So that's, it's obviously short of 50. You can't govern with that. So how do you get to 50? The easiest way is that there's a group of ANC voters, about a third of the ANC voter base, which are just as centrist and moderate and the same as this 40%. So it's a third of the ANC base. The ANC is polling at 50%, let's say. So let's say that's about 15% of the electorate, one third of 50. It's a little bit more, but let's make it 50. If you bring that block across to the 40, you've done it. 55, you're governing. It's great. If you think that's great. Now, to bring that block across, you've got to do two things as the opposition. The first is that you've got to be able to stand together and work together for the advantage of the greater whole. If you own that in your brand, you will help to liberate this 15% of the total vote out of the ANC market and into your market. It's absolutely essential. If you don't do that, then rightly, that ANC bloc says, well, you know what, we're not happy where we are. This is not going very well. But you chaps don't look much better either. So we might as well just stick where we are. It's perfectly logical. The second thing you need to do as the opposition bloc is you need to demonstrate that in practice, you need to inculcate the realistic belief that where you govern, life will get better. If you do these two things, pull together to work together, stop working against each other, work together, and through that inculcate the belief that life will get better where you do that, the result will be that the ANC is defeated and that we bring a centrist opposition, moderate, sensible government to power a year from now. So that's the maths on it for you, Alec.
And what has happened in Johannesburg today, and certainly over the past week, is that one of those opportunities was being presented and has not been fulfilled. What's your thoughts on this? Who's to blame? Or is there anyone to blame? Or is it just an immature democracy?
I'm pretty privy to it, and I don't want to get into too many of the narrow details, but I think it's not going very well at the moment. We're actually, to quote something that's already in the public domain, we are at the loop-kak stage of the negotiations at the moment. So,
what does that mean for those who don't understand Afrikaans?
It's too terrible. It's not good. This is not a positive stage to reaching your negotiations. So it's not going well in the opposition ranks. I think a few things. One is, for 400 years, Alec, the territory that's today South Africa could be governed by one major political player, whether it was the Dutch or the British or the Afrikaner nationalists or the apartheid government or the liberation movements related to the ANC. And that 400 years, this is how we ran the place. One big guy was powerful enough, decided what everyone else would do, and to a great extent, you benefited or suffered as a consequence. What's busy happening now is a fragmentation of that system. And we've got to a stage where one big guy can't really do that anymore. Certainly might be able to do it 10 years from now. So the smaller parties this is an epoch-altering event. We're totally altering the way the southern tip of Africa is controlled and governed. And that is very difficult. It would be nice if it went smoothly now. It's not going smoothly. But I think we should appreciate that we're really 1 year into this process of trying to build these coalitions. There are factors that can help us succeed. One is that if you mess this up as a party, you lose the brand identity of working together, and politically you will lose support as a consequence. So there's, in a sense, an inbuilt kind of self-correcting mechanism here. So any party that is party to terrible conflict and infighting on this, you're going to lose support as a consequence. I also think that what would help greatly aid the process at the moment is maybe a bit far gone to be saved this week, but in the fullness of time, what will aid the process is that some of the party leaders better start to understand the strategic options that open up to you in a world of this kind of fragmentation. The fragmentation is permanent. The only reason the coalition is in reach of governing is because the ANC vote is itself fragmented. But the only reason this didn't happen over the past 400 years is that we weren't a democracy. And we're a very free society. So if you actually leave South Africa, a hugely diverse country by every measure, regional, history, political, ideological, age, wealth, poverty, the whole works. If you're that diverse and you give people the freedom to pick their leaders, they're not going to pick one big leader and then 2 or 3 small guys. They're going to pick a plethora of all sorts. And I think some of our parties need to start understanding that this is the status quo. It's not going to change. This is baked into the formula now. And if you ever want to govern, you need to, in a sense, you must aspire to growth, of course, but you need to be realistic. We're probably not going to reach a point where someone has 50% again. And you're actually going to have to work with your allies, amazingly. These aren't adversaries, they're actually allies. They're all centrists. They're all broadly agreed. You're actually going to have to use them as assets to bring a diverse constituency of voters to a table together. And I think we're in the very early stage of this, and it's going very badly at the moment. But I'm not of the view that it is fatally flawed, this process. And I think as these things break up and parties experience the consequences of the vast public disappointment in this sort of thing, that will be useful. Also, we're still at a point where in Johannesburg, for example, which is the epicenter of the talks at the moment, the ANC with an ally or two can still get to 50%. So that's still an option. You need to actually put that ANC allied option down far below 50, nearer 40. Then the deal making becomes easier as well. And I also think the parties just need to, they're kind of feeling each other out here a little bit, seeing what the limits are of behavior, and that's important. And there's, I don't want to go much beyond that now, but it's there's your man on the scene, as it were. It's going very badly at the moment, but I don't think that means it is a doomed process. And in the longer term, I'm quite hopeful that parties will start to make these kinds of talks work.
But only if the voters tell them that they must make them work.
No, you see, but that will happen.
At the moment,
that'll happen. You see, that's the check and balance. The only reason we're in this position is because of the voters who are fed up with the ANC and on a bit of a lag time are saying, well, this isn't working for us. The ANC used to poll at 70%. We all remember that. Now the ANC is polling at 50%. This is hugely significant. In urban areas, the ANC is polling, I think, at 33% at the moment. Surrendered those markets. And it surrendered those markets because it didn't act in the interests of its supporters. And this is a basic rule. We are a very free society, vastly free. I read a piece Peter Bruce wrote in Business Day yesterday about our Russian relations. He savaged the government. He's not going to be dragged away by the security people that tortured under the union buildings in a basement or anything. We're a very free society. And these opposition players will start to realize, I think, if they don't, they're going to become irrelevant, that if you make the mistakes that the ANC made, of thinking your own narrow self-interests are so important that you can actually suspend the interests of your supporters while you sort out your internal wrangling, your relevance is just going to fall away. And that cuts across the board. You know, even the DA, it's 25, this other block is 15. The DA must not assume that that is the permanent circumstance here. If that block, that allied block next to the DA, feels sufficiently alienated, it will be welded together to a point that it could rival the DA to become the DA's got a great asset in that people think of it as the alternative because it's bigger than anyone else. So the ANC is dying, DA is the alternative. If that 25-15, I can easily see it after this becoming kind of 23-18, and then we're very near parity. And if that happens, the DA is thrown away such a valuable thing that it was thought of as the alternative, and it will in future be thought of as one of the alternatives. A huge difference. So it's under immense pressure to make this work, too. And the smaller rivals as well must realize that their future growth and influence depends ultimately on the ability to prove that they can come together and make a deal. It won't happen this time in Johannesburg, but in the fullness of time, I think the prospects begin to improve.
Frans, at the IRR where you were for quite some time, it has a fantastic stats book. Which gives all the data on South Africa. How many whites? What's the percentage of whites in South Africa today?
I don't know. If you ask me now, Alec, I'd say that stuff was always a bit contested, the demographic, probably 8%, maybe. Don't know.
So let's stick with 8.
10.
That's a good number.
10, yeah.
If you have a look at the DA as the official opposition, you have Helen Zille, who seems to be running the party, John Steenhuisen, who's the leader, the person who is the next most senior, presumably is the Premier of the Western Cape, Alan Winde. Then you have the Mayor of Cape Town, the Mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, the Mayor of Tshwane. I'm talking about 6 top people in the party. They're all white. Now, how can you possibly believe that racial politics are not going to play a role in South Africa and that you are going to be able to put forward that kind of a situation? And I'm talking from the outside, just as a rational human being looking at this. Surely the deal for the DA is to get Joburg at any cost with other partners and perhaps and preferably to show that you can work together with other race groups in inverted commas, although the DA always says that we 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 African, 1/3 coloured and Indian, 1/3 white. But their leadership doesn't seem to show that in the optics. Maybe I'm getting it completely wrong, but
look, in the centrist market,
in that?
There's a centrist market. It's at 60%. South Africa's kind of moderate centrist society. In that centrist market, this stuff matters, but it doesn't matter fundamentally. You know, I looked at it this morning, a full third of ANC voters, so they couldn't care what the colour of the leader of a party was. That's that 15% again there. So it matters, it absolutely matters, but it's not fundamental. It's not a deal breaker for centrist voters at all. They're far more interested in is the leader an effective leader or something along those lines. Now, the DA, you cited correctly, the DA's communications people seem incapable of doing the same. But the DA is quite diverse. It's 1/3 white, 1/3 black, 1/3 coloured, balanced Indian, essentially. I mean, it's amazing that its own comms people have never announced. They concealed this fact from the public. Now, let's talk about the DA for a little bit. DA is polling at 25%. In the kind of fragmented society that our politics is going to become, they're a big party already. We're going to become a parliament 10 years from now because of the nature. We've got a PR electoral system, so proportional representation. We don't vote for a leader and then everyone else loses. The leader wins, everyone else is gone. Proportional representation, it's very diverse, it's fragmenting very quickly. Our parliament 10 years from now is going to look like a hybrid between the current Israeli Knesset and the German Bundestag. Now, in those parliaments, it is quite a thing for South Africans who are not very versed in this stuff to think the biggest party's got about 20%. And the second biggest, maybe has 15, and then there are quite a lot that have kind of 5 or 6. And they've got to get together and form governments. And they form very interesting governments. The Greens and the FDP, the German kind of conservatives, got together in the recent government before the collapse of the previous Israeli government. The Arab List and some of the Arab Party and some of the right-wing Israeli parties were in government together. So this thing's going to happen here. Where I think, I actually wrote a speech on, I'm busy writing a speech on this, where this goes, if you say, what will it look like? I think 10 years from now, our biggest party will be a sort of slightly rural African nationalist party of older people, 30%, maybe 35%. The second party is going to be the centrist urban kind of core, and that's going to be 25 or so percent. Then there are going to be a whole lot of little parties, there'll be a handful of sort of 5 to 6 to 7% parties, and these will tap particular constituencies. And there'll be a whole lot of smaller ones. So in Carter will be a 5 or 6 sort of ethnic nationalist, and that ethnic nationalist vote will become important. And watch the Western Cape with Gaten Mackenzie. He's a capable chap. And he could do extreme. The DA and the ANC have assumed that the coloured vote in the Cape will always be divided between them. And that's a mistake. It's not going to be divided between them. Wait for a little upsurge of coloured nationalism with a charismatic leader, and that vote goes to a third destination, or much of it goes there, threatening even the DA's majority in the Western Cape. So we'll have a lot of these smaller parties, and this will be our condition. And I would say with better leadership, the extent of and foresight and strategy and just understanding of why this is happening, and that it's futile to pretend that you're going to pursue, these little fringe votes that are breaking off this little bleed you have into the sort of ethnic nationalist vote in your flanks. You're not going to get that back again. And I don't think as the DA you should even try. And with just a little bit of a better understanding of that, I think in the DA camp, it's something I try and instill in the DA camp too, is that you've done exceptionally well. It started at sub 2%, it's now 25%. It's a home to a lot of that centrist market already. Its future growth lies in that third of the ANC centrists as well. And I've immense respect for Helen and what she does, and for John. These guys, that they sit in these talks and sort these things out, is absolutely heroic, and we should be grateful to all of them, and to the opposition leaders broadly, and to many ANC leaders. It's easy to attack the politicians, sit here, me and you, and say if they'd only done this, the country would have been better. I'm very wary of that. But I do think that the DA can celebrate the fact that it is already a major player, and that it mustn't be too concerned that on its flanks, in the allied centre-right opposition, with supporters that get along and well enough with its supporters, these are not its rivals or the threats to the DA's future and its growth. DA has done extremely well. It will be a big part of that future. And it needs to pursue the centrist vote and realise that the fringe ethnic nationalist vote, probably not a market that it should be chasing too intently, and shouldn't to too great an extent influence its opinions around things like Johannesburg. And because that does weigh on everyone, of course. These are allies, but they're rivals, of course. And the strongest point, I think, to put to the DA chaps, is that if you do try and chase these fringe votes, a bit of the Northern Afrikaner vote or the Cape Afrikaner vote in the Cape, and Stellenbosch University's language issues and all these things, you risk alienating that ANC moderate vote that wants to come to you because you are centrist moderates. Look there. That's your.
If you look strategically, and that seems to be lacking a little at the moment. So, Frans, what we take from what you've said to us now is, dit loop kak, i.e., not going well, but you remain hopeful.
Of course, and look where we're at. When 20 years ago we were, The ANC was at 70%. Thabo Mbeki was at the peak of his power. 5 years after that catastrophe in the country, we were on this long downward slide. There was no, very pessimistic people. We're now at a point where ordinary people are bringing about change. They've got the ANC down to 50. In the urban vote, 33, I think, is the number. I mean, the country's changed far faster than I think many people realize, and far more democratically. And this process is frustrating. But in the same speech that I'm writing at the moment, I say, look, it is frustrating, and it is that. But remember what the alternative is, that the country would have changed through violence or coercion. We're not there. Where we are is the politicians are talking to each other. And they're talking right now, at this very moment, they're talking to each other. We must keep them talking to each other, because if they talk to each other for long enough, and we remain a free society, the odds of them coming to a constructive arrangement rise. And if you have a proper appreciation of time, I know if you live in the country today, it is frustrating, but if you have a proper appreciation of time and realize that this is an epoch-changing event, changes the way the country's been run for hundreds of years, it probably is going to take a little bit of time for this to settle and for it to work out, but the prospects of that are good.
Dr. Frans Cronje from the Social Research Foundation. And just to add to that, South Africa rates 25th out of 180 countries in the most recent Press Freedom Index, ahead of Australia and the United Kingdom. So reinforcing what Dr. Cronje said earlier. I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.